J.D. Cheney. I'm the Executive Director, CEO of the Kentucky League of Cities. First of all, congratulations to each of you on your election or reelection to city office. We are thrilled that you would take a few hours out of your busy schedules. We know they're all busy, especially this time of year, to spend a little bit of time to learn more about what you've undertaken in your decision to run for city office. Um, and we're going to spend the bulk of the time today talking about what we would categorize as laws that you might want to understand before you go into office, to keep out of the newspaper. That way, if you're a council member, you don't go and try to fire the police chief or do any crazy actions like that winds up with you in a lawsuit right at the start. But before we go into the nuts and bolts of the legal ins and outs that Morgan and I will cover today, I want to just spend a little bit of time talking to you all about our organization. Not our organization, it's not my organization. I'm just privileged to work for it. It's your organization, the Kentucky League of Cities. And I have some folks joining us today to help explain that and what we're all about. First and foremost, I do hope you understand that we mean it when we say that it is the organization that's run by city officials. That's ultimately who we're accountable to and who we answer to. And I hope today is the start of a long partnership, both with you all as individual city officials and, of course, continuing relationships with each of your cities. We're not new to the city government game. We have been around since 1927, so we're almost 100-year-old organization that started back in 1927 and was formed by 12 cities. City officials came together and said they needed to form an organization that represented their interest in Frankfort and Washington in a unified way. Before that time, if you read the transcripts, it looked like the legislature was pretty good at dividing and conquering, creating classes and treating cities differently. And we started as an advocacy. We're still your primary advocate in dealing with Frankfort and Washington, D.C. and executive branch agencies. That's a reason we were formed, and that's one of our core functions that we still do today. Then we went into the insurance business. We insure the bulk of your cities. Doug Goforth will talk a little bit about that. We started education and training programs, and we've evolved into a one-stop shop, hopefully providing a myriad of services and benefits for your city governments and you all as individuals to help equip you all to do your all's job. We are governed. When I say it's your association, we are governed by city officials, people just like you. There may be a few board members on here. I see Marlon. It's one of the squares that's up. He served on our board of directors for a while from Corbin. We have 4 officers: a president, a first vice president, immediate past president, all city officials. 17-member executive board composed of all city officials that govern this organization, that adopts its budget and makes decisions related to it, and a 65-member board of directors that governs our legislative and policy positions that we take in Washington and Frankfort, whether we go and kill a bill or try to get something passed for you. And the reason that's such a large board is because we want every size of city represented. We want every region of the state represented so that we can form a unified agenda for you all as city officials. So you've made the decision to be a public servant, and our job is solely to serve those of you that have decided to serve. And that's what you'll see us do. We want to make you well equipped and better to make your community better. I know that's why all of you all ran. If you did, if you want to be the first person to raise your hand that said you did it for the pay or the power, in 20 years, I've never had any city official say, the pay was pretty good, so I ran for it. Or, I want to exercise this extreme amount of power that city governments have. It just doesn't happen. The reason you all are all here, and a commonality that you all have, is that you want to see your community succeed. And our goal is just to provide you the tools and resources you need to do that job better. As city officials, foundational to our organization, you will learn that it's a firm belief that local decisions are best made at the local level. That governs almost every single thing we do. We think your constituents put you in place to make decisions on their behalf. It's much better made in Monticello or Hopkinsville or Hillview or Corbin than it is Frankfurt or Washington, D.C. So we're about local control and local decision making as we do our business. I have a couple housekeeping items. First of all, you'll see this poll, and it looks like the bulk of attendees today are council members. We have commissioners. We have several mayors that have joined us, a few city clerks and code enforcement officers. So we're going to go over these basics. If you're on the call, well, I guess we're up to 65 squares now, and you don't have your name up or you're calling on a telephone, go ahead and change your name so we know who you are, so we can count you as present. And then if you're on a phone and you can't change your name, you may just go ahead and unmute right now and identify yourself, so that way you can get credit for attending. I think we got a 502-817-9056.
Yes, sir. That's Ron Luce, West Point, Kentucky.
All right, Ron, thanks for joining. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
We'll be sure we mark you down. And then we got a 859-326-0109. Well, at some point you may want to identify yourself so we can mark you as present. I do have some KLC staff people joining the call to help talk to you a little bit about the League of Cities. And first, I'll introduce KLC's Deputy Executive Director, Doug Goforth, to talk a little bit about our insurance and finance programs.
And I just want to say congratulations to everyone again on being elected. Our entire team here is looking forward to working with each of you. And I want to try to give some information about our insurance and finance programs. Not trying to come across as salesy on this, but I think there's some valuable information here. What we found over the years is that cities work better together. And a prime example of that is your member-owned KLC insurance program. And back in the 1980s, the traditional insurance market almost totally abandoned writing municipal governments. And because of that, KLC and several member cities got together and started an insurance program. That insurance program has grown to over 500 members, over $6 billion in insured property values, and protecting over 15,000 city employees. And the program, we don't really say it's just insurance, it's a program. And the program has been designed just for what your city does every day. And so it's more than just insurance, it's developing sidewalk safety programs, safety grants. We have 4 firearm simulators that travel around the state to teach officers not just how to shoot, but what's appropriate force, when not to shoot. And we have model policies and disaster recovery programs. Our team is just literally a phone call away. Even if it's a cyber attack in the middle of a UK basketball game, we're going to be there to answer the call and make sure to get you the help that your city needs. So I want to talk a little bit about our health insurance program. It's a fully insured program through Anthem. The last 2 years, the average rate of increase has been 2%. That's pretty good considering inflation with health insurance. And there's a lot of programs, a lot of different policy types that we have for every range of budget. And we'd be happy to talk to you about that. We've got a little over 200 participating members in the health program now. We'd like to think a few years ago, we were a little bit ahead of the curve for this pandemic in that we came out with a telemedicine program called Healthiest You, which allows all of our insureds to be able to call 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and talk to a doctor on the phone to get the help that they need. And they can call in prescriptions and other things, and that's included as part of our health insurance program. The finance programs have participated in financing over $1.6 billion in city projects, has a AA- rating. And what that means is that there are only 10 cities in the state of Kentucky that individually have a better rating than that. And that rate ties directly to the interest rate that you would be able to borrow at. So it's really a great example of how cities have been able to work together to help save money. And over the past 2 years, the finance program has refinanced as interest rates have dropped. We've helped cities refinance and have saved city governments over $7.5 million in interest charges. So the board members, as JD mentioned earlier, these boards are no different. All three of these boards are governed by your peers with either elected or appointed city officials. And our staff, we go from Hazard to Hopkinsville, from Taylor's Mill down to Somerset and Corbin, and all areas in between, so that we can be very close by to respond to your city whenever we're needed. And so these programs were created to be there when you need them and your city needs us. And our entire staff is ready to work with you to help move your city forward. And we're really excited about the opportunity to get to come out and meet each of you, especially after this pandemic is over as well. So thank you.
Muted. Then appreciate that, Doug. Appreciate your taking the time to share with them about their member-owned insurance program. We also have Terry Johnson, who is their manager of member relations, with us today to talk to you about our member programs that are designed to support your all efforts while you all are in office. Terry.
Good morning. Hi, everybody. It's great to see some familiar faces, and it's especially great to see some new faces. So we are happy to have you with us this morning. As JD said, I'm going to go over some of our programs that are part of your membership. We just want to make sure you're aware. Those of you who've been with us for a while, we've got a couple of new things I'll mention. And to those of you who are brand new to KLC, we want you to know what's part of your membership. So I'm going to jump in here and share my screen and go through a few things with you quickly. Let's see. Well, there we go. We are always at your service. You're why we're here, as you've heard JD say. We have a number of programs and services, as Doug mentioned, created just for you based on your needs. And if you take anything away from what I'm saying, I just hope that it will be that you make KLC your first call, because we feel like most of the time we can answer your questions. So we hope that we will always be the first place you start if you need something city related. You're participating in one of our most popular member services right now, which of course is training and education. We've done a lot of virtual training this year, as you can imagine. In fact, our team did 40 virtual sessions between March and June around COVID. And again, they were just very nimble and able to put that together. We obviously prefer to do in-person trainings and do dozens of those a year. So you'll hear a lot about those from now on. We do conferences, and many of the people who are on the call have been to our conferences and summits, and they can tell you that our annual conference is a great place to learn, to network with people, to get a lot of resources. Last year, our conference was in Northern Kentucky, and it will be there again this coming year. We had about 800 people last year, and this year's conference was virtual, of course, but we look forward to seeing you next year in Covington. We also do a series of summits, and they evolve as needed. We have summits on code enforcement, alcoholic beverage control, just a number of issues that are day-to-day, nuts and bolts, important issues for city folks. This picture you're looking at here is one of my favorite conferences. That's our safety conference. And so we have a conference totally dedicated to the needs of your frontline safety employees. And then you will be, as you begin to get emails and information from us, you will become very aware that we do monthly events on all kinds of really interesting topics. They're free of charge. But again, the content is always designed with you in mind. So one of the most popular things that we do is a continuation of what JD and Morgan are going to do today. It's called the City Officials Academy, and it's really popular. It's a very intense 2.5-day session on all the things that you need to know as a city official. And of course, it'll be virtual this time, and it's January 19th through 21st. So if you go to our website, you can get a little bit more information about that. But training is a big part of what we do, and you'll learn a lot more about that in the coming days and months and years. So, and a kind of an emerging service for us is our community and economic development program. That's sort of pivoting a little bit for those of you who've been members for a while. You know that Tad Long and Bobby Bryan are great and have done a lot of work in the area of community development for our cities. They're now moving into doing a lot more in the area of economic development. So they can provide our cities with really sort of full economic development assistance and all that entails. Also, if you've got projects in your cities that are starting or have sort of stalled, or you just need to finish up, they can help you with that. They do community strategic and business planning. They can help you if you've got an important hire in the city and you want to do some consultation, coaching, and onboarding around that. And they can also help you with community engagement and meeting facilitation. And the way that usually looks is there's a big issue in the city. You want to do a public meeting. It could be a prickly issue. It could be a great issue, but public meetings, staff meetings, anything of that nature that you feel like you could use a little help with, they can help you. And again, this is all part of your membership. There are many other things that we do, and probably with regard to time, the best thing for you to do is go to our website and just spend some time looking around. There are a couple of tabs at the top with member services and more. If you check out those tabs and do the drop downs, you'll see just a whole list of things that are member services for you in your city. We have special business partnerships An example of that is we partner with the company to provide you a product called IT in a Box, and that's just what it sounds like. It's a menu of services for IT, including web development, cybersecurity, document management. You know, we have a mass communications program. So there are a lot of things under that member services tab that you can learn a lot more about. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to share a whole lot about them, but there's a lot on the website. Under the More tab, which is on the right-hand side of our website, you'll see a place where you can post jobs at no charge. Your city can post RFPs and RFQs, and I want to make sure that the current members are aware of this because it's a brand new service. We have a grants tab, and we update that page every week. And we have an awards program. And so, you know, we like to recognize cities and city people. And every year we have a city official of the year, a city employee of the year, and a city government of the year. So another one of the new things that we're sort of taking on is an emphasis on some bigger issues and some resources around them. JD and Doug heard a lot this year around the issue of homelessness. And so we're putting together some resources around that you'll learn about very soon that will then evolve into some education and some other things. So the other thing we like to do that is really a beneficial service for you is connecting you to each other. We have programs for mayors. We have a listservs for city employees, or city attorneys. So we'll be doing more of that sort of thing too, where we just bring members together, peers, and some virtual meetups, things of that nature are some things that we're working on. So just to summarize what Doug has said, and to emphasize a couple more things, we're here for you. Everything we do is for you. As Doug mentioned, we insure more municipalities in Kentucky than all other carriers combined. You probably already know that KLC is the strongest voice for cities in Frankfort, absolutely, and very successful in that area. So we want you to be part of that process. More than half of all cities in Kentucky have used our finance programs. And as JD and Morgan are going to demonstrate here very shortly, our municipal law team and our entire team in that area are just the experts when it comes to municipal law. And they receive literally thousands of inquiries every year around legal issues, personnel issues, that sort of thing. So again, that is the kind of stuff that you're going to hear a lot more about at the City Officials Academy. We're on social media. We hope you'll follow us and join us there. And we just want you to be our first call. Don't hesitate to call me if you want to share an idea, if you have a question or a concern or anything like that. So that is a very brief run through of some of our member services. And JD, did you want me to go ahead and mention about the contact list now, or did you?
Yeah, that'd be fine.
Okay. One little housekeeping thing that we need to let you know is we are sending everybody a list of all the participants today. So if for any reason you don't want your name and contact information to be on that list, just go into the chat and send me a private email or a private message, and we'll make sure that we don't list you on there. But so that's all I've got. I really look forward to meeting you and seeing those of you that I haven't seen in a long time. And thank you so much. JD.
Thank you, Terry. I appreciate you all listening and learning a little bit more about the league. We'll get into the heart of the subject in a presentation we do title "Laws You Should Know Before You Take Office," just to avoid any controversy. I always maintain that one of the beautiful things about city government in Kentucky is that the 2,600 elected city officials approximately are the dental hygienists, the school bus drivers, the retired bankers. They're you. They're not career politicians. Rarely is it used as a springboard for higher office. You're just there to make your community better. And that beautiful part of being your neighbors, governing your community, also means that quite likely when you start out, you don't quite have a full comprehension of the way city governments operate. And we see proof of that sometimes when, as I joked before, but it really does happen at least every couple of years, a council member tries to fire the police chief, or a commissioner signs a $100,000 contract and attempts to bind the city. And so it really is, before you go into office, a good idea that you understand what your roles and responsibilities are, along with how to conduct meetings and other things like this. This kind of breaks the surface. And if you have a general understanding of the issues that Morgan and I will cover, then you're going to be in good shape. And then if you want to learn more and go into more detail, then I'd encourage you to sign up for the City Officials Academy, which also unfortunately will be a virtual event in January. Let's go ahead and get started. Usually the first question that we get is, how do we get, we won, now what? How do we get to take our office? And some of you have already taken the oath of office. Under Kentucky law, you are allowed to take the oath of office anytime between the certification of the election results and before the end of the day on January 1st. It's really important that you get that oath of office and take that oath of office prior to the end of the day on January 1, when your term of office begins, because under Kentucky law, the failure to do so could result in a forfeiture of the office. I like to share a story from probably about 16 years ago, where we had an entire council who did not take the oath of office on their election until the middle of January, and the mayor did not care for his council very much and attempted to try to get the whole council kicked off for failure to take the oath of office and use that statute. First of all, it's your responsibility as an individual to ensure that that oath of office is taken. You got to take the oath to swear you will faithfully execute the duties of the office, and that if you haven't heard Section 228 of the Constitution, you have to swear you haven't fought any duels or carried any challenges for a fighting of duels. So it's a good historical reminder that our system's designed for the resolution of disputes in an amicable way rather than resulting in violence. But you are responsible for taking that oath of office. Now, many of your cities do provide an opportunity to do that. Some cities are doing that in virtual form. That is perfectly legal. You don't have to personally appear in order to do that. If you want to have the oath administered, if you're hunkered down because of the pandemic, and you want to do it via Zoom, you can take the oath of office via Zoom. But it is your responsibility to ensure that's done by January 1. You can go find your own notary, circuit court clerk, judge executive, member of the General Assembly, any district, circuit, appellate court, Supreme Court judge, Kentucky judge, any federal judge, regardless of their status, is authorized to administer that oath. And you can do that if your city's not going to do a ceremony before January 1. If you got the packet that was mailed from us, you can see a sample affidavit. You can have the officiant who administered the oath execute that affidavit to prove that you've taken the oath of office. So again, any judge executive, magistrate, member of the clerk, permitted to do so. I'm getting feedback. Right. Mute. There you go. In order to administer the oath. The good news is, if you really like taking that oath, as long as you do it one time between the certification and your result of your election results by the County Board of Elections and the first day of January, you're good to go. You can take it as many times as you want to thereafter. If you really like it and you want to get up every morning and start your day that way in the mirror, taking the oath, or you want to get it administered officially multiple times in a ceremony, you can do that. Just be sure you get it taken once before January 1. So before I move on, I'll ask if there's any questions, and we'd like this to be as interactive as possible through this virtual format. But if you have any questions, you can type them in chat, or you can unmute your microphone. We're happy to take questions as we go along. Any questions anyone has about the oath of office?
JD,
Yes.
do you just have to take the oath of office one time, or do you have to take it every time you are elected in?
For every term of office. So if you were elected to the council, you would take the oath of office to begin your second, third, fourth, fifth, or even 20th term for some city officials. So for each term of office, you take the oath.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any more questions about oath? All right.
Judy, I have one. Do you have to take the oath in person?
No, I had mentioned we just got an attorney general opinions yesterday that you could take the oath of office virtually via Zoom if you wanted to, via Zoom or WebEx or Microsoft Teams or whatever. FaceTime, if you want to use the FaceTime feature on your iPhone with a notary or officiant that's allowed to administer the oath. You are that had been our legal position, and Attorney General Daniel Cameron gave us an opinion yesterday that agreed with that assessment. So you do not have to appear in person to take the oath of office. Any additional questions? All right, if not, we'll just move along and talk generally about city governments in Kentucky. You probably have a good idea that you're not at the top of the heap when it comes to governmental power. You all likely recall from your civics classes that the federal government and the state governments has the supremacy rule. You remember that the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of Kentucky and the laws enacted pursuant to those constitutions are the supreme law of the land. So a lot of times cities kind of get the leftover powers, but I will tell you that they're the most important in terms of impacting the quality of life of the people that you serve. You can make a more immediate impact with that. But from a legal perspective, a fundamental rule is that a city cannot enact any laws or regulations that conflict with the Kentucky Constitution or the United States Constitution. You're limited because they've occupied those fields. You probably remember from your basic civics class that the U.S. Constitution has a little provision called the 10th Amendment, which reserves to the states any authority and powers not specifically or impliedly granted to the federal government. We have the same type of concept in Kentucky, except it's by statute, that city governments have the ability to govern as long as they don't attempt to do so in conflict with a state constitutional provision or state statute. That second bullet point is that concept is known as home rule. And you'll hear us talk about home rule a lot in terms of our legislative advocacy efforts. And that's simply the legal principle that local officials can make local decisions without interference from state government. Before 1980, Kentucky cities did not have this ability, the ability to govern. If you wanted to enact an ordinance or a regulation inside of your city, you had to go to the statute books and make sure that you had permission to do so from the legislature. And the city home rule statute that came about in 1980 kind of flipped that rule on its head. And now it is that a city can govern itself, make its local decisions, as long as that law, regulation, or action doesn't conflict with any state constitutional provision. So you have home rule. You don't have to seek permission. You have to make sure you haven't been prohibited. And the legislature over the years has carved out about 20 or 25 areas where cities cannot make a local decision. A couple of those examples are you can't enact any ordinance that prohibits moving motor violations related to talking on the phone while operating your vehicle. City ordinances are preempted from that. You can't enact any ordinance that prohibits a mother from breastfeeding in public. So the legislature carved out those areas and kind of eroded that home rule principle, but it's a much better than it was in 1980. Instead of looking to the legislature and begging for permission, now you just have to make sure they haven't enacted any laws that prohibit you from taking that action. And that home rule principle is given by statute. It's not embodied in the Constitution. And what the legislature and General Assembly giveth, they can taketh away. So we have to watch in terms of legislative engagement, a number of bills that get introduced every session, which takes away your ability to raise revenue, to govern your community the way you want to. And this session promises to be no different. I've already had about 4 or 5 meetings with groups who want to completely sidestep planning and zoning regulations, that want to completely preempt your ability to regulate food trucks. There's a food truck lobby now. They want a state rule and licensure. So those are the kinds of legislation that we'll defeat or attempt to defeat in the legislature to ensure you can continue to design laws that govern your community. The third bullet point on this is a point worth noting. Sometimes you may interact with a judge executive or magistrate who feels that the county government has some superiority to the city government. And the best way for me to sum this up is in the words of my 5-year-old daughter, who likes to frequently tell her 14-year-old sister that she is not the boss of her. County governments are not the boss of cities. So if you get some of your county officials saying that county government is a higher on the hierarchy, or somehow control the city governments inside the county boundaries, that's not the case. They're co-equal units of local government. County government cannot enact laws requiring the city governments in their boundaries to perform certain functions. However, one caveat to this rule is that counties, when they enact county ordinances, the county ordinances have application countywide unless they've specified otherwise. So for example, if a county decided to do a leash law for your pets, that I'm getting to meet a lot since March through the Zoom calls. If they enact a leash law in the county, that's going to apply countywide unless they specify it only applies in the unincorporated portions of the county, unless the city government enacts an ordinance addressing the same subject matter and imposes the same or more stringent standards. But a county government cannot enact a law that tells you what to do. And if you need to remember that, just remember, folks from Bowling Green, you tell Mike Buchanan he's not the boss of you. City classifications, in a large part, we won't have to talk about these as a number of years go by from 2015. In 2015, the General Assembly eliminated city classifications. So all cities besides Louisville are what they call a home rule class. So the goal and the policy goal is to give cities the same tools, regardless of your size, regardless of your geographic location. You may hear some reference back to, we're a second-class city, we're a third-class city. Those truly legally don't exist anymore. There are a few vestiges left over from the old classification system, like the restaurant tax. only old fourth and fifth class cities can do a restaurant tax. And those are things we're trying to get disposed of with legislative enactment to try to ensure that Glasgow, if they wanted to do the restaurant tax, they'd have the same ability as Cave City to do the restaurant tax to fund tourism and other things like that. There are some vestiges left, but in large part, there's no legal distinction in terms of city classification. Does anybody have any questions on this slide in particular about home rule or county governments or city classes?
Katie, there is a question in the chat from Carlos Bailey of Bowling Green.
Okay, Carlos?
He's an attorney in Bowling Green and was recently elected to the city commission and was told by Bowling Green city attorney that he can't have any civil or criminal cases where BGPD could be called as a witness under section 25-4 standards of conduct, paragraphs 1 and 2. As a criminal defense and personal injury attorney, this will limit his business, but not having criminal civil cases will impair independence of judgment. Would like to get your advice.
Carlos, let me give you my cell phone number. It's 859-608-6177. When we come off of this, we'll talk about that in terms of the professional rules of conduct. If we just touch base after, we'll go through that, because that's going to end up being governed by those Supreme Court rules applicable, as you know, to our profession as attorneys, more so than a city government rule. So let's touch base after this and talk about that more in depth. But Hillary's counsel is probably going to be pretty, if not completely accurate, pretty close to accurate with regard to some of those limitations. So if you'll give me a ring after this, we'll talk through it. Any additional questions? All right, we'll talk about the forms of government. So this is important in terms of knowing what your powers, roles, and responsibilities are, because mayor of Bowling Green, or the mayor of Franklin, the mayor of Paducah, based on their form of government, they look a lot different than the mayor and the council members in the council form of government. In Kentucky, by far, the most common form of city government is a mayor council plan of government. And just by looking over the participants in this call, the vast majority of you all participating in this call are going to find yourselves organized under the mayor council plan of government. Second most common in Kentucky is the commission plan of government. Several of you here have a commission plan of government. And then we have several of you on the call too that are organized under the city manager plan. There are 19 cities in Kentucky that are organized under the city manager plan of government. And we'll talk about the differences between those three in depth. We also have some other options available for city governments in Kentucky that include the consolidated local government. There's only one of those in Kentucky. That's the city of Louisville. Urban county government, one of those in Kentucky. That is the city of Lexington. And then you'll see three more down there. The mayor alderman form of government is available for cities of the first class, and that would be the largest city located in any county with a population of greater than 250,000. So we don't have any real danger of any city organizing under that mayor alderman plan of government. It used to govern Louisville before it merged, so that probably will never be utilized. And then I want to just draw your attention not to make a great detailed legal distinction, but you see charter county government and unified local government. Those are available merger statutes out there available for city and county governments to merge, like Louisville and Lexington did under their respective plans. And the reason I bring that up is because frequently people run for office or county officials and others start talking about merging city and county governments. And I want you to know if that's on the agenda, and it may be, and that's a great thing the city and county want to explore that. But I will tell you, if your county judge executive gets starry-eyed, or your magistrates, and they say, well, let's talk about merger and forming a charter county government, I want you to not walk away, but run away. Not only say no, but heck no, to doing a charter county government. From a city government perspective, that allows the county to control the whole plan of government. The merger, the judge and the county are in the power position of how that would work. And so if you're going to talk merger, use the unified local government statute, because that permits you all, the city governments, to have equal representation on the planning committee, and the forming and discussion and exploration about whether a merged government works. And a city and cities are equal partners in that endeavor. Charter county government, the county controls the process. And so from a bargaining position and a development position, you're going to have to be partners, and allowing the county to completely control that's not a good option. So just make a note of that. If you are talking about merger, do so under the unified local government architecture, rather than using the charter county government statutes. All right, so let's get into the forms of government and how they operate and what the roles and responsibilities are. And we'll start with the mayor council plan, and we start with that one not only because it's the most common, but also because it's probably likely the most familiar governmental function that you all have greater awareness of, because it has essential to that the separation of government powers that are not present in the other forms of government. In a mayor council plan of government, we have two branches of government that have very distinct powers, roles, and responsibilities. In the mayor council plan of government, the executive power is held by the mayor. So the way you think of the governor, the way you think of the president, it's the same type of thing. The mayor in that form of government, mayor council plan, is a CEO of the city, charged with the responsibility for executing the laws and administering the day-to-day functions of city government. On the other hand, legislative power is ultimately held by the city council. So similar to or analogous to Congress or the General Assembly, the legislative power is held by the council. You'll see in this form of government that it's extremely important to have a functioning city, that the mayor and the council work together, because the mayor can't administer without effective legislation, and legislative policy can't be implemented without the cooperation of the mayor. So in cities where you see very little happening or it's dysfunctional, you see a breakdown between the executive and legislative authority. There's built-in tension there that mayors and council have to work through, the same as what you're seeing play out in the press with regard to the General Assembly and the governor right now in Kentucky related to the use of executive orders during this pandemic. There's natural tension between the legislative and executive functions, but you have to move beyond that in order for the city to move forward. And you'll see how that works. Specifically, the roles of the mayor in the mayor council plan are to appoint, supervise, discipline, and terminate city non-elected officers and employees. So they appoint, they supervise, they discipline, and terminate non-elected officers and employees. So there's two categories of employees here. Non-elected officers. Anybody have any idea what positions would qualify as non-elected city offices? So under Kentucky law, the city clerk, the city police chief, the fire chief, if it's not a volunteer fire chief, the city administrator, and in the city manager form of government, the city manager. State law says those officers are considered non-elected city officers. And that distinction is really important, because the mayor in the mayor council form of government, yes, has the right to appoint. However, non-elected officers, unlike rank and file employees, are subject to council approval. So if the mayor decides he wants a particular individual or she wants a particular individual to serve as city clerk, the mayor has to nominate, and much like the Senate confirmed the Supreme Court justices recently that you've seen on television, the council has to give their confirmation in order for that person to serve in a non-elected office position. So clerk, police chief, fire chief, if it's not volunteer, city administrator, all of those positions are considered non-elected offices. Now, the city council can create other non-elected offices by ordinance. So in some cities, that may be the city attorney, maybe a city engineer, maybe a city chief financial officer, treasurer. Those in some cities have been classified by ordinance as non-elected offices. If they're non-elected officers, the mayor and the mayor council form of government's authority to appoint is for non-elected officers means the right to nominate and get consent or confirmation from the council prior to the non-elected officer being able to serve in that position. That's not the case when it comes to rank and file employees. So for the city clerk, the mayor says, I would like Ms. Jackson, and I know Bowling Green, I know Ashley's on here. Bowling Green's a city manager form of government, but if you were council, I want Ms. Jackson to serve as clerk. The council would have to approve that in order for that to go forward. But for the deputy clerk position in the mayor council form of government, and the position exists, the mayor would just hire, and the council does not have any input into that process. Also make another note that when the mayor is executing his or her power to appoint, supervise, discipline, or terminate, that police and fire employees have some special protections when it comes to discipline and termination. There's a law known as the Police Officer Bill of Rights, which stipulates a procedure in order to discipline and terminate. And some cities have some other statutes that govern police and fire employees in terms of the discipline and termination process. The mayor also is responsible for preparing, presenting, and administering the city's budget in the mayor council form of government. Look at the three verbs there: prepare, present, and administer. What verb's missing? Enacting or approving the budget. So the mayor's responsibility is to develop what he or she thinks is the best plan for the budget, a proposed budget, give it over and present it to the council. And then the council is ultimately responsible for determining its contents. The adoption of the budget is a legislative function that goes to the council. The council, when the mayor prepares a budget, could take it away, throw it in the garbage, proceed from scratch. Generally, what you see is that there's a good deal of deference, much like the General Assembly does the governor's budget in the mayor's presented budget that they've prepared, because the mayor is responsible for running the day-to-day activities of the city. And so generally you have in large part the adoption of the budget as proposed by the mayor, but ultimately the decision lies with council on how the city is going to spend its resources. So the mayor prepares it, presents it, council adopts it in its final form, however the council wants to do that. And once the council has done that, it goes back into the mayor's chair to determine how that is going to be administered. So you'll see a little bit more about that process as Morgan talks about that later on in more detail. The mayor in the mayor council form of government is responsible for making, executing written obligation contracts on behalf of the city. Two verbs here: making and executing written obligation. So it's more than just signing contracts. Once the council has approved the budget and said, we're going to spend $100,000 to make repairs at City Hall, the mayor then has the authority in this form of government to go out, find a vendor, of course, complying with any procurement laws, make the contract, enter into the contract, sign the contract as part of the administration of the city budget without returning back to council once the expenditure has been approved in the budget. In the mayor council form of government, the mayor also has the ability to approve or veto city ordinances. The act of ordinance approval is pretty simple. It's signing the ordinance. After the council has enacted it, it can go into law. In addition, the other option is to not sign it and wait 10 days and it would go into law without the mayor's signature. Or the mayor can effectuate a veto of a city ordinance. This does not exist in the commission and manager cities. If your city's not organized under that plan. In a mayor council city, the mayor can veto the ordinance within 10 days of its enactment by the council by sending the ordinance back unsigned with a written statement of his or her objections to the ordinance, and veto the ordinance, like the governor or the president can do with the law. Now, just like Congress or the General Assembly, the city council has the ability to do what to a vetoed ordinance? They can, there you go, override. They can override the veto within 2 meetings of the mayor's action. The council can vote to override by 1 more than a majority of the membership of the entire council. So if you're in a city that has 6 members of the city council, a little math problem. How many votes does it take to override the mayor veto if it's 1 more than the majority of the entire membership?
4.
5. Membership's 4 plus 1 more is 5. So if you have a 12-member council, how many votes does it take to override?
8.
8. 1 more than the majority of the membership. So you got 2 meetings after the mayor's vetoed in order to override the veto. You'll see another distinction here in the mayor council plan about the mayor's ability to vote. In the manager form of government and under the city commission form of government, the mayor is a member of the legislative body, that he or she can introduce legislation, vote on legislation. But in the mayor council form of government, the mayor can only vote in the event of a tie. And it could be a tie on a procedural motion, it could be a tie on the enactment of the ordinance, or any matter along those lines. And notice it uses the word may, not shall. The mayor does not have to vote to break a tie, but can exercise the option in the mayor council form of government to vote to break the tie. So it's permissive. What happens if you have a 6-member council and the vote is 3-3 and the mayor says, no, I'm not going to exercise my option to break the tie? Anybody know what would happen? It would fail for lack of a majority. That is correct. So the state law also gives the mayor the ability to preside over council meetings. Not the ability, it ascribes the responsibility for presiding over meetings of the council by statute. Now, sometimes we get, when councils get seated, they decide they don't like the way that the mayor presides, and they decide, well, let's enact an ordinance, letting somebody else preside over meetings of the council. And let's go back to slide 1. Can the council enact an ordinance that says the mayor can't preside? Anybody?
No.
No, that's absolutely correct. Why not? Because cities can't change state law by local ordinance, and state law says the mayor is a presiding officer of the city council meetings. So the mayor presides. Now the mayor, if the mayor is not at the council meeting, then the council has to select a member of the council to preside in the mayor's absence. Again, they can't pick anybody else besides, they have to pick from among themselves a presiding officer in the mayor's absence. But the mayor is a presiding officer if he or she is there. The mayor also has the ability to call special meetings of the city council. They can do that. We'll talk about that process for doing that under the open meetings section. But the statutes, the state law gives the authority of the mayor to call any special meeting of the council. And the mayor is responsible for providing for the orderly continuation of the city government when he or she is absent. Now, this used to be utilized a lot if you traveled out of the city or you traveled out of the country or anywhere. The mayor would have to do an executive order to ensure that somebody supervised employees. With over the past decade, with the use or better with these cell phones, you don't see executive orders that take away the mayor's authority to perform executive functions when they're gone. However, it is wise for mayors to look at having an executive order in the event that there's some incapacity. And that happens frequently with 416 cities. Sometimes situations develop where the mayor gets sick or ill and is unable to govern. So they'll enact executive orders, and you should consider one if you are a mayor, about who would perform your functions in this mayor council form of government in the event of an incapacity or temporary incapacity. The council, on the other hand, and you'll see how these relate in performing its legislative function, is responsible for enacting ordinances and regulations. So you make the law of the city, and ordinances have the effect of state law if they're properly enacted and adopted. So if you're going to do something that governs citizen conduct, those are all legislative matters, and those go to the council. And much of a city's function is a result of legislative enactment that requires ordinance enactment. Most important among those is the levy of taxes and fees to fund the operation of the city. So it is the council that sets the policy, the legislative policy, as to what types of taxes, whether you're going to do an insurance premium tax or an occupational tax, the limited number of taxes that you have, and what those rates would be if you're going to levy the tax. Not only what types of taxes, at what rate, how that's going to be paid. That's all a legislative determination if you're going to have resources to spend. And likewise, the council then determines, once that money is collected through budget ordinance enactment, the appropriation of those funds. So when you adopt the annual budget by ordinance, you decide, here are the resources we collected through the levy of taxes and fees to fund our operation, and here are our spending priorities, whether that's salaries, whether it's special projects, repairs, maintenance of city streets. Those priorities are determined by the council through the adoption of that budget that ultimately the mayor is responsible for administering, but the determination is a council function. As I mentioned before, the establishment of non-elected officers and employment positions. Sometimes this gets confusing when new mayors come in. They think that they can just say, well, I'm going to create a special assistant to the mayor and pay him $100,000 a year. It doesn't occur that way. There has to be a position established by the council through a pay and classification plan ordinance or through an ordinance that establishes the office for the mayor to be able to make the appointment to them. So the mayor can't create positions. That is a function of the council. As I mentioned before, approving the mayor's appointment to those non-elected office positions, not employment, but non-elected officers, clerk, police chief, fire chief, if it's not volunteer, city administrator. Those appointments initially have to be approved by the city council. Setting the compensation of non-elected officers and employees through that pay and classification plan ordinance. So salaries and the range of pay for your city employees are ultimately determined by legislative act of the council. You have to have a pay and classification plan ordinance. So new council members that aren't familiar may want to take a look, and commissioners too. Every city has to have a pay and classification plan. Take a look and see what your city does in terms of that ordinance. The bigger the city, I know Mayor Lynch is on here from Hopkinsville, and Bowling Green's on here. You probably have a much more comprehensive pay and classification plan ordinance that governs a great number of city employees that you all have. It may be much more simple in a small city. It may be embodied in the budget ordinance. If you only have 5, 6, 10 employees, you may comply with that requirement by putting the position and the salary with each annual adopted ordinance. But it's a question you may want to ask. Again, that's a legislative function in terms of setting the salary that the council does. In addition, the council is responsible for setting the compensation of elected city officers. So you all determine what the mayor is going to be paid or what you're going to be paid yourselves as council members. One special rule before you get too excited about giving yourself a big raise: you cannot change the compensation of an elected city officer during their term of office. So you can't get mad at the mayor and say, hey, I'm going to cut your salary because you're not doing what we want you to do. You can't double your salary. Kentucky's Constitution prohibits changing the compensation during an officer's term. What the law requires, though, if you're going to make adjustments to elected city officials, you have to set that by the first Monday in May in the year that the officer is to be elected at the latest. So if you're going to change the mayor's compensation effective for the term that would begin January 1, 2023, you would do that. You would have to do that by the first Monday in May in 2022. It would not go into effect until January 1, 2023. That is before the primary election. That is before the elections. I think that probably helps explain why salaries are so low. You're setting the salary prior to the running for office, and it's not going to take effect until the next term. And we've seen city officials who are reluctant to make any changes prior to the term of office before standing for election. But if you're going to do that, first Monday in May at the latest in the year that the officer is elected, and it applies to the new term. So
Janie, we do have a question from Ms. Robin Dottie in Somerset as to whether training for elected officials is required by statute.
Mr. Dottie from Somerset, training is not required by statute currently. There's been discussion with the legislature about requiring something like this, an orientation session, a 3-hour session, but statutorily, legally, in order to hold the office right now, you don't have to complete any training whatsoever. And those of you that are enduring listening to me talk for all this time and learning something about being a city official and the legal requirements will probably operate more smoothly. But you will probably, if you have peers on your council or commission that aren't interested in learning how to do things legally, you're probably going to find that as a great source of frustration for you if they don't understand the rules. So we encourage everybody to try to learn a little something, not to be experts on this stuff. That's why you have your city attorneys and your city clerks and other professional staff, your CFOs. But knowing generally what the rules are is pretty important, but it's not a legal requirement. The council also is responsible for conducting regular meetings at least once a month. The statute says that you are to have at least one meeting each month. A majority of the council, if the mayor won't call you into a special meeting, has the ability to call a special meeting of the council. And then council also has an investigative function, has the ability to investigate activities of city government under certain process and rules. If you want to interview a staff person, you have to give notice to the mayor, get written comments. Rarely seen this provision used, but much like the Congress can conduct an investigation, council can conduct an investigation and make conclusions, even if it may not have the power to act. It has the power to investigate if it's needed. Any questions about the council plan? With just summing up here on personnel issues, that seems to be the most litigated area where there's a change in leadership. Frequently comes a change with personnel. And put up a caution sign, not a stop sign. We're not going to tell you not to make changes that are needed for your city that the leadership determines. But when you do so, because it's such a litigious area, we would encourage you to seek legal advice from your city attorney. KLC has a personnel services program that can provide counsel if you're insured with the league. We also assign counsel to help you and your city attorney through the process if it's complex, if it's dealing with police, fire, or implicates any of the federal employment laws. You need to know your city policies and then be aware of those limits on roles and authorities. If you're a council member wanting to fire somebody, guess what? As a council member, you only have the power of one vote with your council. You don't have the ability to take lateral action. And likewise, the entire council. If the council wants to terminate somebody, we just went over the roles and responsibilities in the mayor-council form of government. That's up to the mayor. The council can't terminate an employee on their own. So seek legal counsel, seek legal advice before you take any of these personnel actions. Quite frequently, they end up in litigation, a city being sued for not doing stuff wrong necessarily, but for not following the correct procedure, and you get tripped up on some technicality. It's an extremely complex area. Any
Okay.
questions?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, we do have one question from Mayor Green in Elkton. Is there a maximum you can pay a mayor or the council?
And that's an excellent question, Mayor Green. Kentucky's Constitution actually limits it, I believe, to $7,200, $7,500, something along those lines as a maximum pay. Well, thank goodness that was written in 1891, I think, or 1940. It may have been updated. The Supreme Court and the courts have applied a rubber dollar theory with that figure and brought that up into $20 amounts. And so the maximum compensation somewhere sitting around $75,000, $76,000, I believe, for members of the mayor council, and likewise the mayor and commissioners in the other forms of government as a maximum compensation. And one caveat to not changing compensation during the term of office, you are permitted to provide a COLA, cost of living increase, from 1 year over the next. Now, you can't pull out a 1976 ordinance and say, well, we were making $2,000. Let's bring that up to $2,020 in that amount. You can do 1 year COLAs 1 year over another. And that does not violate the prohibition on changing compensation of office. That rubber dollar theory applies. And so your maximum compensation, I think, is sitting somewhere around 75 or 76. Morgan, you got the exact figure on that?
It's actually closer to 78, and I wrote it down yesterday. And yeah.
All right. So you do have that maximum, Mayor Green. Any more questions on mayor council? All right, so let's talk a little bit about the commission and manager plans. We can do that together some of the time, and we're gonna have to separate it out for some of the process. We do not have any separation of executive and legislative authority under the commission and manager plans of government. So we don't have a mayor with executive authority and a council with legislative authority. The commission or the board of commissioners has all executive and legislative authority at the end of the day in these forms of government. So that sometimes frustrates mayors in those forms of government because they don't have separate executive authority. They don't have the ability to veto ordinances. They're not ultimately responsible for the hiring, firing, terminations, supervision, and discipline of employees. Unlike the mayor and the mayor council form of government, in this form of government, the mayor is a member of the legislative body. 4 commissioners and the mayor compose a 5-member commission or board of commissioners in the city manager plan. They can introduce legislation. They can vote on it. It's not just to break a tie. They are a participating member of the legislative body which also has executive authority as a whole. They don't have to provide for the continuation of government because the statutes and law requires the appointment of a mayor pro tem in those cities, which I'll talk a little bit about. Now, even though the mayor doesn't have separate executive authority in these forms of government, the mayor does have specific legal responsibilities that state law requires them to perform. Just like in the mayor council form of government, the mayor and the commission and manager plans is assigned the responsibility for presiding over meetings of the commission or board of commissioners, executing, signing all notes, bonds, contracts, written obligations on behalf of the city falls to the mayor. The mayor has the authority as a presiding officer to call special meetings of the commission or board of commissioners. And then the law requires in some instances, the mayor, even though he doesn't have or she doesn't have separate executive authority, to make some appointments to some boards and commissions. The most common example of that is your Tourist and Convention Commission. The mayor has a unilateral authority, and even in the commission and manager plans, to make the appointments of the individuals to serve on those boards and commissions. There's a couple of examples with certain utility commissions where that occurs, where the mayor just has that authority as assigned by statute to make those appointments. And this last bullet point is could be classified as more than just a ribbon cutter. Yes, your ceremonial head, if you're a mayor in this form of government, you probably are out as a liaison with the public quite frequently. But it's a political head of government. And I live in Richmond. My former mayor would fuss about, it's a city manager form of government, would fuss and say, JD, if you think the people on the street realize that there's a difference between a council and a commission and a manager form of government, you're sadly mistaken. And that's true. Most of the public does not realize there's a difference in the form of government. And so the political head really ends up, because of public perception and lack of knowledge about different forms of city government, really ends up resting with the mayor. So the mayor frequently finds himself in this form of government as setting the political agenda of the city, liaison with state government, with other governmental units, county government, and other things like that. So it's a very important job in terms of setting the tone and tenor, even though there's not separate executive authority. And then you'll see under Kentucky law that even in this form of government, in a situation like we're in now, and we have a state of emergency declared, then the mayor does take on some additional responsibilities if you have a state of emergency, to be able to promulgate executive orders related to the emergency. And every one of our cities in Kentucky has enacted emergency orders, and even in this form of government has assumed emergency powers as a result of that. And then if military or martial law is declared, then the mayor becomes the head of the city in that instance. And those are the special functions assigned to the mayor in the commission and manager plans, even though there's not that separate executive authority. And I'll reiterate again, commission and manager plans, you're governing as a body. So the enactment of ordinances and regulations, the administration of ordinances and regulations are ultimately, at the end of the day, the responsibility of the commission or board of commissioners. You're levying the taxes and fees to fund the operation of the city. You're determining how to appropriate that money through legislation. You have to conduct regular meetings. You can call the commission. The majority of the other commissioners, if the mayor refuses to call a special meeting, can call a special meeting of the commission or board of commissioners. Ultimately, at the end of the day, appointment, discipline, termination of employees and non-elected officers ends up resting with the commission or board of commissioners. Even though you may have a city administrator, or you may end up in the manager form of government having a city manager, ultimately those supervision or discipline and termination decisions end up coming back to the commission or board of commissioners to make the final decision. The establishment of non-elected offices and employment positions, just like the council had, but also the appointment. with the executive that the mayor had, the mayor council form of government, rests with the commission or board of commissioners. Setting the compensation through the pay and classification plan all reside with the commission and board of commissioners in that form of government. So we said that the mayor did not have to provide for the orderly continuation of government. If you're in a commission or manager plan city, state law requires that the commission or board of commissioners select a mayor pro tem. That is voted on at the first meeting after the election. In the mayor's absence, whoever selected to serve as mayor pro tem acts for the mayor, possesses all the rights, powers, and duties of the mayor, including that contract execution and presiding over meetings of the commission or board of commissioners when the mayor's not there. So true or false, the highest vote getter has to be mayor pro tem. Highest vote getting commissioner is mayor pro tem.
False.
That is false. Now, a lot of your cities, by history, tradition, or just simply trying to avoid the controversy of picking somebody, has by history said, well, we're going to make the highest vote getter the mayor pro tem. And that is probably the majority of Kentucky cities that do it that way. But state law does not require it to be the highest vote getter. The commission and board of commissioners make that decision by vote at the first meeting after the election. Let's talk a little more specifically. The manager plan cities and the council cities can kind of cover their ears here not to get confused, because this does not occur anywhere but the commission plan. So if you're looking in Tompkinsville and Nicholasville, I think there are Plum Springs, I think you all may be commission form of government. The city has to classify administrative functions of the city into departments by ordinance. So you'll see you have a police department, you have maybe a roads department, a parks department, and then for the day-to-day functioning, a commission has two options in the commission form of government for how to supervise that day-to-day activity. First, you can establish a non-elected office of city administrator. You can say, we're going to hire a city administrator that's going to report back to the commission. They're going to be responsible for management of employees and other activities of the city. And then most commonly, what occurs is that at the first regular meeting of the commission, they designate one commissioner to have a superintendent's function over each department. So when we get back together, you may run into a city official from a commission plan of government who may come up to you and say, well, I'm police commissioner in the city, or I'm roads commissioner. That's a very limited function. Superintendents, it's minimal oversight and really a liaison function back to the rest of the commission. It doesn't give that commissioner who has that superintendent's function the right to hire, fire, or make decisions, but really serve as more of a liaison to report back, call the commission in where the commission has to take action. And that is the most common way that commission plan cities the function. So you have an exciting first meeting after an election to be able to select the mayor pro tem and then designate your commissioners with superintendents functions over each department. Most commonly, the mayor is, as a member of the commission, given superintendent's function over the administrative component, oversight of the clerk and the finance officers. That superintendent's role with administrative, but that doesn't necessarily have to occur that way. You have to have the agreement of the commission on how that's going to be organized. And again, I'll reiterate, in this commission plan of government, ultimate executive authority is vested with the city commission. So any action that's taken by an individual commissioner with that superintendent's function, or if you have a city administrative officer, can ultimately be overridden, reversed by the commission when it sits as a body by taking action as a whole. What's a unique feature of the city manager plan? And I know we have a few city manager cities on here. It's a very obvious answer. And the 19 cities that are organized under that form of government in Kentucky, the key feature is the fact that you have to have a city manager in that form of government. The duties of the office of city manager are specified both in state law, and each of the 19 cities that have a city manager are required to have a local ordinance that establishes the position and can assign other duties to the office of city manager beyond what is specified in state law. In addition, your ordinance has to establish qualifications for that office. The minimum state qualifications are that they have experience in the area. There's not any educational qualifications. Some cities put educational or experience qualifications in order to occupy that non-elected office. That's something that you need to look at in your ordinance if you're from one of those 19 cities that have a city manager form of government that may go beyond the minimum required by state law. A city manager is appointed for an indefinite term. So that means they don't come in and out every election cycle. Once they're appointed, they serve until they either quit or they're fired. They have to be appointed by a majority vote of all the members of the Board of Commissioners. So with your 5-member body, you have to have at least 3 individuals vote for the person to occupy the office of city manager, to approve that. It can only be removed by a majority vote of all commissioners. So again, you can't have a meeting of 3 commissioners or the mayor and 2 commissioners and have a 2-to-1 vote. You have to have a majority vote of all the commissioners in order to remove them. And it has to be you have to provide a special 30-day notice and a hearing process prior to the removal of the city manager from that position. Now, state law does prescribe some specific duties to the city manager. And I think you're probably going to look and say, well, that sounds fairly similar to what you described, JD, as the mayor's power in the mayor council form of government. And there is some overlap. The city manager is not the CEO of the city. The Board of Commissioners in that form of government is ultimately the CEO. They are the chief administrative officer. They perform the administrative functions on behalf of the Board of Commissioners. The person that's city manager prepares and proposes a budget, like the mayor did in the mayor council form of government, because they're responsible for that administrative function. They'll prepare a budget for the Board of Commissioners to consider, administer. Once the Board of Commissioners has adopted it, the city manager is responsible for administering that budget on behalf of the Board of Commissioners. State law requires that they prepare and submit end-of-the-year reports on finances and administrative activities of the city. State law requires that. The city manager may be directed by ordinance or by motion and vote of the Board of Commissioners to carry out certain executive responsibilities. The city manager ultimately does not make the decision on hiring and termination of individuals. Their responsibility is to make recommendations to the Board of Commissioners on those personnel matters like hiring and terminating. And then the responsibility for supervision is stipulated in state law for the city manager to provide that supervision of the departments and city governments. And I've put this slide on here for the Board of Commissioners. At the end of the day, the buck stops with the Board of Commissioners. The city manager reports to the Board of Commissioners. The Board of Commissioners can provide directive. The Board of Commissioners can override any action taken by the city manager if it disagrees with it. The boss of the city manager is the Board of Commissioners meeting as a body, again, not as individual Board of Commissioners, but meeting as a body. And then same caution sign with regard to personnel issues. Know the law, know your policies, seek legal advice from the city attorney and from the league if you need to do that, if you're making personnel decisions, just to avoid litigation issues. Are there any questions about the commission or manager forms of government? Because that's the fastest I've ever talked about those forms of government. So I probably left something off. Anybody from Danville or Tompkinsville, Bowling Green, any questions at all about commission or manager? Got gonna assume you all got that really quickly. So what we'll do now is take probably about a 5-minute break. It's 11:32. So in 5 minutes, we'll come back and go over the open meetings law. I'll finish that up and you all will end up not having to listen to me anymore. And we'll let Morgan talk about budgeting requirements, ethics, open records, procurement, and some other important features. So we'll come back together in 5 minutes. We'll take a 5-minute break, allow you to go freshen your coffee or run to the restroom, and we'll see you back here in 5 minutes. Open Meetings Act. In the meantime, I didn't look in chat here to see if there were any questions before we move on. So we will get we'll get a copy out of the slides to all attendees. I did see that. We'll do that with all participants. Get a PDF to you with the slides and the summary. And then Darren Jordan asked, oh, that was just to me privately, so I won't read that out loud. And Darren, I'll get with you on that. Any more questions that you all have related to the form of government? Well, good news is you'll won't have to listen to me much longer as soon as we get through this Open Meeting Act presentation. So you're on the council and you're on the commission, the Board of Commissioners. How do you go about complying with meeting and getting together? So much of the activity that you have puts you in a appropriately called legislative session of the council and commission. How do you comply with the law? And compliance with the Open Meetings Act is the mechanism that you all will have to follow in order to be able to govern. We'll start with Open Meetings Act requirements by talking about its purpose, and that's best stated in the preamble to the bill, that the business of the people that you all represent, shall not be conducted in secret. You know, prior to the late 70s, Kentucky didn't have any law forcing you to provide notice or forcing counties, cities, state agencies to provide any notice to the public at all that a meeting was going to be conducted. And then Kentucky followed suit on what's commonly referred to as sunshine laws. They originated in Florida, but it references a Supreme Court opinion that sunlight's the greatest disinfectant. And it's based on that principle that people's ability to view in the formation of local policy and what you all work, you've been entrusted with their resources, will provide a great check on government officials that to do the work that you've been elected to do and not make self-serving decisions. So Kentucky implemented what I would call a very good open meetings law requirement that's really withstood the test of time here in this state for how you're going to go about conducting business. Let's start first of all by deciding whether or not you have to comply, whether you're an agency that has to comply. And this applies to county fiscal courts. It applies to county boards, special districts, state agencies. But from a city perspective, it also quite obviously is going to apply to you as a council, a commission, and a board of commissioners. I figured you probably already knew that. One area where the city does get tripped up is that it also applies to any committee, subcommittee, commission, or board that the city creates. You have to comply with the open meetings law, even if you think it's a temporary ad hoc advisory type of group. Say you create a parade committee and it's created by the council or commission or board committee or even the mayor. That committee, that subcommittee, regardless of whether it's permanent or temporary in nature, also has to comply with everything we're getting ready to talk about with the Open Meetings Act if they meet. Now, when you start reading the Open Meetings Act, it's a little scary because it defines a meeting as a gathering of 2 or more people. And what's that mean? 2 or more people gathered together. That's a conversation. Luckily, 2 or more people gathered together. Luckily, Kentucky's open meeting law does not apply to conversations. It doesn't apply to all gatherings of 2 or more people. And if you remember anything from the open meeting section we're talking about today, it's this slide. The Open Meetings Act is only triggered when there is a meeting of a quorum where you're taking action or discussing public business. So any meeting of a quorum where you're taking action, that's or committing to take a certain action over something over which you have jurisdiction over, or you're talking about anything over which the city has the ability to govern, that would be considered public business. So this first bullet point, quorum, where actions taken or public business is discussed. First thing you have to determine, what is a quorum? Anybody know?
Half plus one.
Half plus one, a majority of the membership of the council. So if you have a 12-member council, a quorum of a 12-member council would be 7. If you have a 5-member board of commissioners, a quorum would be 3. The mayor is counted in the commission and manager cities for purposes of quorum determination. Action taken, obviously taking a vote or making a commitment to vote in a certain way would be action taken. And a discussion of public business means talking about any matter over which the city would have jurisdiction. So if you have all 6 members of the council together and you're talking about Kentucky basketball, is that a problem?
No.
Even though I think a lot of us would probably like to have some control over Kentucky basketball right now, you all cannot, as a council or commission, do anything to affect Kentucky basketball. If you're getting together to talk about whether or not you're going to make improvements at the city park, that is an item that you have jurisdiction over. So the Open Meetings Act is only triggered where you have a quorum, where you're taking action, or public business is discussed. And then we'll talk about some exemptions to that where you can cut off public view. If it's a discussion of certain subject matter, you can go into a closed or executive session. One more bullet point that deviates from this general rule. There's always exceptions to exceptions. When the law was first written, a lot of individuals found a way around the open meetings law by saying, well, you know what, we'll just conduct a series of mini meetings where we don't have a quorum present, where you would have 3 council members, and one of the 3 council members would go meet with the next 2 in order to get business tied up and done. So you cannot have a series of less than quorum meetings that are designed or have the intent to circumvent the legal requirements imposed by the open meetings law. Now, this is not a prohibition on effectively talking with one another or lobbying one another to support or oppose matters that are properly before the legislative body, but you can't do it with a design or intent to have little mini meetings to get around the open meetings law. So because it only applies to meetings of a quorum where you're taking action or discussing public business, you could think of conventions, conferences, training sessions, those types of things like this. We have some legislative bodies, we have potentially, if everybody had been sworn in, we have a quorum. If it's a general training session, you're attending a KLC conference or a area development district meeting or things along those lines, as long as you're not talking about public business, then there's not a violation. You can be together as a quorum. Social gatherings. Every Christmas season, we end up with calls about holiday parties. Not this year because of the pandemic, and a mayor may say, "Well, look, we're going to send 2 council members to the holiday party from 6 to 6:30. 2 more will come from 6:30 to 7." You don't have to do all that. You can be together as a quorum as long as you're not taking action. You can be at the same social gathering Or if you're less than a quorum, you can definitely meet. You just have to watch out not to talk about public business or take any action. Always interested to see when we have a convention or conference or a city officials academy. Sometimes the city council or commission will travel together in the same vehicle as a quorum. It's really difficult. The one thing you probably have in common with your fellow council members and commissioners is the fact that you're on the council or the commission. So it's really difficult to talk about perhaps other things to avoid that. So you got to be extremely cautious. The other thing I'll point out here is that it may not just be physically being together. Technology, emails, social media, those types of things can get you in open meetings trouble as well. If the infamous reply all feature to emails has resulted in a number of open meetings violations. If the mayor innocently sends an email to all the council members and you get a bunch of reply all responses, you've essentially facilitated a discussion among a quorum of public business. Likewise, back and forth between council members and commissioners on a Facebook page or Twitter or other things of that nature, you have to be careful that you're not engaged in a dialogue or discussion of public business in those forums as well. So I think something popped up. Do I have a question so far?
Yes, JD. Annette Baker from West Point asked, is the 2019 city officials legal handbook obsolete?
Oh. It will be obsolete here in about 3 weeks because we'll have the 2021 version. But there's a lot of correct content, but what you have is a 2-year span, the 2019 session and the 2020 session of the General Assembly with a whole bunch of legal changes that have been made. So we would recommend getting the 2021 version when it comes out here in a couple of weeks. All the participants of the City Officials Academy get a free copy of that, not the orientation, but the academy in January. Or you can order that or have the city order that from KLC when it's released. I think probably here in 2 or 3 weeks, we'll have that available, or at least a month from now, it'll be available. The open meetings section of that is pretty up to date. There've been a few changes with regard to video teleconferencing and things of that nature. But I would get the updated version because there's no way of knowing whether it's accurate in terms of legislation changing. All right, so let's go back to open meetings. If you have a meeting of a quorum where you're going to take action, take a vote, or discuss public business, how do you go about making your meetings open and complying with the law? Meetings of a quorum where you're taking action or discussing public business, you have to hold the meeting at a time that's convenient to the public. Now, what does that mean? A time convenient to the public. Anybody tell me a time that's convenient to the public?
After normal business hours.
After normal business hours, so 6 or 7 at night. What about 9 a.m., 8 a.m., 2 p.m.? The statute requires it to be a time that's convenient to the public. It doesn't say at the time most convenient to the public. So you don't have to go about doing some polling of your citizens to say more citizens could attend the meeting if we had it at 7 p.m. versus 5 p.m. It just can't be a time that's inconvenient to the public. And through a series of decisions, we've pretty much narrowed that down to the fact that you cannot set a meeting, from at midnight to 5 a.m. If you're trying to pick a time, if we think about what the meanings of the open meetings law is, if you're trying to pick a time that would minimize public participation in the event, you are at least violating the spirit of the open meetings law. So don't go from midnight to 5 a.m. or pick a time when you think all the old people have gone to bed because you don't want it to be controversial. Pick a time that you think will maximize public participation. If you hit between 12 a.m. and 5 a.m., you're going to be in flat violation of the law unless, and there's always exceptions to the exceptions, unless you have some emergency situation that necessitates getting together at 2 a.m. that the city council or commission or board of commissioners is going to have to respond to. But it has to be at a convenient time. Try to design a time that would be most convenient for the public attendance to facilitate that. Again, if your meeting is a quorum where you're going to take action or discuss public business, you have to hold the meeting at a convenient place, places that are convenient to the public. And that really has two different meanings. Convenience in terms of geographic location. The general rule is that you have to meet within the boundaries of your city limits, unless it's necessary to do otherwise. There are occasions where it's necessary to meet outside your corporate boundaries. You can envision a circumstance where if you're getting together with the legislative body of another city in Kentucky, unless you're in Jefferson County, you really can't be in two cities at one time. In Jefferson County, you can be in Louisville and one of the other 83 cities in Jefferson County. But for Richmond and Berea, you can't be in Richmond and Berea simultaneously. Elizabethtown and Ratcliffe, you can't be in both cities at the same time, but you may want to have a joint meeting. So you're picking one city or the other. Because you want to maximize public participation, you may end up in a situation where you have 1,000 people that want to come to a controversial planning and zoning matter, and your city council chamber holds 50 people. Well, you can go a mile outside the city limits to a high school gymnasium or elementary school auditorium or cafeteria, and fit the entire crowd. In that instance, in order to maximize that public participation, it may be necessary to move outside your geographic location. So general rule is inside the city unless there's a necessity that forces you to do otherwise because of the circumstances. Also, in terms of places that are convenient to the public, that means accommodating facilities. You have to try to design, and the pandemic has changed this analysis a little bit because you have a different ways of using video teleconferencing, but the public has the right to see and hear, to both see and hear you. And so the facility has to be such that the acoustics allow for hearing, for people to be in. Now you can make changes if you have a meeting and all of a sudden twice the number of people than you fit would show up. You may be able to use closed circuit television. You could adjourn to go to a bigger facility. If somebody tells you that they're in the back and they can't hear what you're saying, you have a duty to remedy that acoustical deficiency. If you're notified of it, you're not mind readers. I always joke, we see a number of open meetings requests that are made to the Attorney General's office by the jerk. I say each city has at least one jerk. Sometimes they get elected to the council. But about every couple of years, you'll see somebody that sits through a meeting and then never tells the city they can't hear or they can't see, or they can't participate, and then complains to the Attorney General's office. You're not clairvoyant. You're not a mind reader. So they have to tell you they have a problem with hearing or seeing in order to do that. So meetings of a quorum where you're taking action or discussing public business at convenient time, convenient place. You also have to record the minutes of the meeting. This is where your city clerks come in handy because they're responsible for keeping the minutes. The law requires at a minimum that those minutes reflect any action that's taken by the public agency that's in the meeting. So it may be, if you don't take any action, that the meeting was convened and the meeting adjourned. Most of the city clerks add much more narrative to that to capture historically what was discussed. But the minimum requirement under Kentucky law is that if it's a meeting of a quorum where you're taking action, you have to have minutes to memorialize that, and you have to record any action that was taken and the votes of each member of the public agency, if there was votes taken. Again, in order to make the meeting open, meetings of a quorum where you're taking action or discussing public business, convenient time, convenient place, take minutes. You can't place any conditions on attendance to the meeting. What that means is you can't say, oh, only citizens of the city can attend this meeting, or only Republicans can come, or we're going to have a ladies' night at the council meeting. No conditions on attendance can be imposed whatsoever. You can't require people to identify themselves or sign in. Now, this is very different than imposing a condition on the right to speak. The Kentucky Open Meetings Act, although it's commonly confused, does not grant the right to the public to speak before the council or commission or before the public agency. Only the right to attend. In attending, it means seeing and hearing, both hearing what the members of the public agency are saying, to see your face in case you scrunch it up or roll your eyes or do whatever else. There's a right to see and hear, but not a right to address you as a council or commission and board of commissioners. You can impose conditions on the right to address the legislative body, but you cannot impose any conditions on the right to attend. And then the last point, in terms of making the meeting open, you have the right of the media and the press to both attend and broadcast and cover the meeting. Is almost, if not entirely, absolute that the press has a right to be there. The press has a right to broadcast and cover the meeting and disseminate that information to the public. So one more time, if you're meeting of a quorum where you're taking action or discussing public business, convenient time, convenient place, take minutes, don't place any conditions on attendance, and be sure the press's right to cover the meeting is preserved.
Okay, then we have 2 questions.
Fantastic.
Todd Alcott and Bowling Green asked, is discussing another council member's thoughts on an issue or recommendation for an appointment, etc., in a private conversation without influence, is this circumventing the act?
No, sir, Mayor. That's the way, Mayor-elect, that's the way government works. I mean, you're going to lobby one another, you're going to express opinions and have private conversations. It's only where you have a meeting of a quorum or you have some design or intent to circumvent the requirements of the Open Meetings Act. So Mayor, you wouldn't have any issue with what you just described. But now, if you decided you wanted to get a decision made readily before your Board of Commissioners meeting, and you went to Commissioner Hill, then went to and y'all had the discussion, and then sent Commissioner Hill to talk to Commissioner Perigin, and then you went to talk to Commissioner-elect Bailey. Then all of a sudden, you've demonstrated some intent to circumvent the requirements of the open meetings law. If you've done it by design or intent, then you've got a problem. But now, Mayor, if you called one commissioner and said, look, I'm proposing an ordinance that does this or that, or I would like to appoint this or that person to this board, and you lobby each commissioner individually for the legislation, and you're not trying to get a ready-made decision prior to going in, and it's not intent to circumvent the requirements, then you don't have a violation problem at all there. What's the other one? Did that get you, Mayor?
Actually, that helped out immensely because you don't want to, go to another commissioner and suggest something, and catch them by surprise. And you also want to have them, understand thought or intent, but you're not trying to influence their position or their stance or, trying to corner them. And so I just it's one of those slippery slopes where you want to be cautious, but you also want to be respectful.
Yep. Government won't function well without conversations. And so thank goodness that the Open Meetings Act does not permit less than quorum conversations absent an intent to, a provable intent to circumvent the requirements of the act. Morgan, you said there were two. Is there another one?
Yes, sir. William Compton from Plum Springs asked, do the minutes have to be posted where the citizens can readily access them, even if they did not show up at the meeting?
They do not have to be posted. There's not a legal requirement for they have to be taken. They're generally approved at the meeting that occurs after the clerk has prepared them. They do not have to be posted. A lot of cities, in the interest of transparency, have been creating archives and availability recordings of the meetings or the meeting minutes, but there's not a legal requirement that they be posted. However, when Morgan talks to you in just a second about the Kentucky Open Records Law, you'll see that there is a requirement that you respond to any open records request if a person wants to see those meetings. Those are subject to disclosure under the Open Records Law. But it would be discretionary whether you posted them on a website or something along those lines. A lot of cities are doing that, but it's not because it's legally required. Okay, we'll move on. There's different types of meetings and in terms of regular meetings. So we've covered meetings of a quorum where you're taking action or discussing public business, convenient time, convenient location, take the minutes, don't place conditions on attendance, and also let the press cover it. But special requirements for regular meetings. And every one of your cities have an ordinance that sets time for regular meeting. You remember, state law requires you conduct at least one regular meeting each month over the course of the year. And every one of your cities have an ordinance on the books that say, here's our regular meeting. Our meetings will be held on the first Monday of every month at 7:00 p.m. at City Hall. Every one of you have an ordinance that reads that way. That can be changed by ordinance through legislative enactment. If the Board of Commissioners or the Commission or Council decides that it's going to switch to a 9 a.m. meeting as a regular meeting, or 5 or 8, in order to accommodate one, participation from the individuals that were elected, that may be modified. There's generally discussion after election about whether regular meeting ordinances. But you have your ordinance that sets, it may set 2 regular meetings a month. Any deviation from what is stated in those regular meeting ordinances that you all have adopted would result in it having to be a special meeting. Your regular meeting schedule is by ordinance, so it's adopted. It's subject to disclosure under open records. You have to also post it and made readily available to the public for your regular meeting schedule. But any deviation, if you change the time, you change the date, if it falls on a holiday, then it becomes a special meeting. Now, a lot of cities have gotten forward thinking about the way they do their regular meeting ordinances. And they may say our regular meetings at 7:00 on the first Monday of every month, unless such day falls on a federal holiday, then it shall be the second Tuesday of the month. If that's embodied in your actual regular meeting ordinance, then you don't have to treat that. That's regular meeting. You've already stated that in advance of time, so it's not a deviation. But every one of your cities has this. You can change it by ordinance. That's a legislative body determination on the regular meeting. So anything that's not a regular meeting, and at the Academy, we'll talk a little bit about emergency meetings, but anything that's not a regular meeting is considered a special meeting. If you're doing anything outside the scope of your ordinance that sets a regular meeting schedule, as we talked about before, the mayor in all forms of government as a presiding officer has the authority to call a special meeting. Likewise, a majority of the council or majority of the remaining commissioners in the commission and manager cities could call a special meeting if it's needed. But in order to have a special meeting, you have to follow certain protocol, or otherwise you're going to be in violation. You have to provide a written notice to all the members of the council, the mayor, the commission or board of commissioners, or if you're dealing with a committee, they all have to receive a written notice 24 hours in advance. And to any members of the media who have requested to receive notices of special meetings, that all has to be provided 24 hours in advance. Now, the reason for that is you don't have to guess which media want special meeting notices. The Paducah Sun may not care a lot if the Pikeville City Board of Commissioners is having a special meeting. Paducah Sun cares about whether the Paducah Board of Commissioners is having a meeting, so they file a request. Likewise, a local news station, you probably, those are the members of the media that have to get the notice 24 hours in advance. That has to be sent to all the members of the body, the members of the media that have a request by fax, U.S. Postal Service mail, or personal delivery of the notice, unless you can use email only in the circumstance where the member, legislative body member or mayor, or the member of the media has provided their written consent and their preferred email address to receive the notice. And probably if your city clerk has not already done so, I would fully expect for you to hear before January from your city clerk saying, please give us your consent and your email address where you want notices of special meetings to be sent, because most people no longer have fax machines. I don't know many people that maintain fax machines ever. The U.S. Postal Service is not guaranteed, to get you notice in time. And likewise, personal delivery is sometimes difficult and impossible. So the preferred mode is this email address, but in order for the city to be able to utilize it, they have to have your written consent, the media's written consent with the preferred email address to receive those notices. And that is so the city just doesn't assign you an email address that you never check. So it's up to you all to provide that. But it would make a clerk's life easier and the city's life easier if you would agree to do that. So if you're having a special meeting, 24-hour notice is sent out. It has to also be posted 24 hours in advance at City Hall, the headquarters of the public agency, and the place where the meeting is going to be held. So a lot of times it's always going to be at City Hall. So you just got one posting, but situation like I described, you have 1,000 people that want to attend your meeting and you're going to move it to the gymnasium to have a special meeting, then you have to post it at City Hall and the place where the meeting is going to be held. So in that example, at the agency. Now, what has to be in that written notice that you send 24 hours in advance? Some pretty common sense things like the date and the time of the meeting and the place where the meeting is going to be held. That all has to be specified. And in addition, for special meetings, there is a legal requirement that you have to have an agenda for the special meeting. Notice we didn't say there was any legal requirement to have an agenda for regular meetings. It's not in the law. It's silly not to have an agenda to keep you on course for a regular meeting, but it's not a legal requirement. It is a legal requirement for regular meetings. It is a legal requirement to have an agenda for special meetings. And the reason for that is that you're given the public notice of why you're going into that special meetings, and you can only talk about the subjects that are listed on that special meeting notice 24 hours in advance while you're at the special meeting. You can't talk about anything other than what's listed on that agenda. That's what you're limited to. And you have to be specific. You can't be very broad and general in terms of saying, well, we're going to talk about new business or city business. You have to reasonably, with some particularity, describe the topics that are going to be discussed so the public knows what the meeting is, and you can't talk about anything else. Now, the other thing we'll talk about is with open meetings is exceptions. There are a few circumstances where you can go into closed session. And the four most common ones we'll talk about today for city governments are listed here on this slide. If you're talking about the purchase or sale of real of real property, that should have the word real in there, of real property, land, then an open discussion could effectuate the price or impact the price that you may pay. You can go into closed session if you're talking about buying or selling property outside of the public's hearing and viewing of that discussion. These exceptions are designed to protect the public's resources, not to protect you as council members or commissioners or mayors. It's to guard the public's resources, because if you had an open discussion, let's just hypothetically say, if you were in an open session and you say, let's buy that property on Main Street for $100,000, let's authorize the mayor to go purchase it for $100,000, up to $100,000. How much are you going to pay for the property? $100,000. You're not going to have a chance to be more conservative or protective of the public's resources. So likewise, if you had an open meeting that says we're willing to take as little as $50,000 for this city property we're going to sell, you're going to get an offer right away for $50,000. So going into closed session, that makes sense for the purchase or sale of real property. Likewise, so it would make sense to go into closed sessions to discuss proposed or pending litigation. So if you're out in open and you're talking to your city attorney or your legal counsel that you have defending you in a lawsuit, and you're talking about a settlement, you lose your attorney-client privilege. If you can't go into closed session, you could impact in a negative way litigation strategy, which ultimately the taxpayers are on the line for. So being able to preserve attorney-client privilege, discuss litigation strategy with your counsel to deal with lawsuits and other matters, it makes sense to go into closed session to be able to do that. One commonly abused, the third bullet point, is what a lot of people falsely label as a personnel exemption. It's carefully crafted. It says, if you're talking about the appointment, discipline, or termination of a particular individual, you can go into closed session. This doesn't authorize the discussion of general personnel matters. It's only a discussion which could lead to the appointment, discipline, or termination of an individual. You can go into closed session or executive session, as some cities call it, to have that discussion. Then the fourth most common, even though there are more that you'll learn as you go along, discussions with a business entity. If the openness of the discussion would jeopardize the siting, the retention, the expansion, or upgrading of the business, then you can go into closed session to have that dialogue with the business. A lot of this economic development discussions that occur with business entities that may be looking to locate in your community, there's a secrecy to that for the business. And if an open discussion could make you lose bringing jobs or expansion to bring jobs to help your community, it makes sense for you to be able to go into closed session to do that. Now, there's a common misconception if you hit one of these exceptions that you can just meet, or that the mayor can just bang the gavel and take you into closed sessions. You have to follow a process for doing that. You have to start out in a properly noticed open session, either at a regular meeting or a properly noticed 24-hour notice special meeting. And you have to open it up and start in open session where the public could attend. And then you have to state the nature of the business, the reason for going into closed session or executive session, and the specific provision of the Kentucky Revised Statute that authorizes you to go into closed session. So the mayor saying, we need a closed session. No, you have to have a motion and vote that encapsulates the nature of the business, the reason, and the specific revision of the Kentucky Revised Statute that goes into closed session. This is where your city attorneys and your city clerks and others can advise you, because you're going to have to say, I'm Mr. Mayor or Madam Mayor, I move that we go into closed session under KRS 61-810-1C to discuss the settlement of a pending lawsuit in which the city is involved, because an open discussion could seriously jeopardize our ability to obtain a settlement on behalf of the public. That statutory citation under the open meetings law has to be made. So frequently, the city attorney or the city clerk would help you with the specific statutory citation to make that motion. It has to be carried by a majority of a quorum or a majority of those that are present, if you're able to conduct the meeting, in order to go into the closed session. So no unilateral taking a council or commission into closed session. You can't talk about anything else in that closed session other than the items that were publicly announced in that motion. So you can't, I've been in enough closed sessions with you all now. I know every time, almost every time I've been in a closed session, it generally goes something like this. Well, since we're back here now, before we get started, you can't do that. You can only talk about the items that were specifically listed. And when you're in closed session, the open meetings law forbids you from taking any final action inside of that closed session. You're required to come out into open session in order to take final action on behalf of the city. So that's the procedural requirements of doing so. One last thing in my last minute that I have before I turn you over to Morgan. Right now, you're gonna see things that are very, very different than what you typically would. We have a temporary law in place that the legislature enacted at the end of its last legislative session in March, in April, when the pandemic started, to facilitate Zoom meetings like this of your legislative body. And the bulk of Kentucky cities seem to be using technology in order to conduct their meetings. But there is an exception that typically would apply if you're doing a teleconference meeting. You don't have to, outside of this emergency, you would typically have to provide a single location for people to attend in person. That's suspended during the state of the emergency. We got that enacted last session to facilitate that. Some of your cities may not have the technological ability or capacity because you don't have broadband or whatever. We have a few cities that meet that criteria where they could use audio only during the emergency, but only in the event that that teleconferencing capability was not available in the community. So that law change will be there as long as the state of emergency exists. So we'll be watching closely when the General Assembly convenes January 5th. If they end the declared state of emergency that the governor's done, we'll have to find some other temporary law to keep it where you could easily conduct video teleconferencing without providing that permanent physical location for people to attend. Are there any questions about the Open Meetings Act right now? If there aren't, we'll move on to Morgan, and Morgan and I'll answer all your questions if you want to wait till the end of her presentation.
JD, there was one, you answered this, but I just wanted to make sure that she didn't have any follow-up. Jackie Oliver from Oak Grove asked during the special meeting section whether the meeting has to be posted 24 hours in advance for citizens. And I just wanted to make sure she didn't have any follow-up questions to that.
Yeah, it's you've told the members that you don't have to pay the newspaper to publish it. You have to provide the members of the media that have on file that request. You have to post the notice, but you don't have to send it to every citizen. The requirements are for special meetings, notify the media 24 hours in advance of members of the legislative body. Does that cover you, Jackie? Gonna assume yes. So Morgan, I guess I'm supposed to stop sharing my screen, huh?
Please.
All right, you take over. Let me introduce Morgan Sprague Patterson. About use your maiden name still. She is our Director of Municipal Law for KLC. She is quite knowledgeable in the area of municipal law. She's been with us now for a couple of years. So Morgan, share your expertise on this with their attendees.
Thank you, JD. All right. I'm sharing my screen. I struggled with that last night. The first thing I want to tell you guys is for all you UK football fans, I have great news. We finally have an offensive coordinator. Liam Cohen from the LA Rams is our new offensive coordinator. Yay! For any of you who aren't UK football fans, sorry, we're finally gonna have an offense. Okay, so now let's talk about open records. I know y'all have been dying to talk about open records. And as newly elected public officials, this is going to be something that you will deal with, whether you're commissioner, city manager, code enforcement, mayor, regardless of your position, you will deal with public records. All public records of any public agency are open for inspection. It's the same theory. If you look at the Open Records Act and the Open Meetings Act, they all start with a statement of legislative intent that expresses the same theory, which is you're doing the public's business. When you're doing the public's business, they should be able to see what you're doing. I mean, it's pretty clear, right? So it's the same thing with records. So we're talking about public agencies, and it's defined similarly, again, to the Open Meetings Act. We're talking about all boards, commissions, members of a legislative body. So individually as commissioners and council members, your records as they pertain to your city business, those are subject to open records. It doesn't matter if it's on your home computer, on your personal phone, it just doesn't matter. Those are going to be subject to open records. This also means that under the definition of public agency, elected officials are their own official custodian, each individual person. So that means that someone could email you personally a request for open records. Now, does this mean that your city clerk isn't going to assist you with that? Of course not. No one expects anybody to be an overnight genius or whiz at open records. The only purpose of putting this, kind of keeping this on your radar is so that, you know, if you get a request or if a clerk asks for documents that you have in your personal electronics somewhere, that you're going to have to produce them. Okay. It also covers any state or local entity that receives at least 25% of its income from state or local funding. So that's, again, going to be your boards and commissions, any board or commission created by your city, funded by your city, that kind of deal. And another thing, and this is a question we get quite frequently. Anybody can ask for a public record. It doesn't matter. JD talks about the jerk in your city. It doesn't matter if it's that gadfly or that person who runs around who truly believes that everybody who's ever elected to office is a horrid person and asks for records all the time about everybody. They're entitled. Okay. So when we're getting to talk about who can ask, it's everybody. So what are we talking about when we talk about public records? This is everything. It's books, papers, maps, cards, your social media. If you have a Facebook page, if you have a Twitter account, if you have Instagram, or if you post on Reddit, if you're posting about city business in your official capacity as an elected official, that can be considered a public record that has to be disclosed and produced under open records. So it's really any material owned, used, or in the possession of a public agency. We caution our elected officials about about using social media, not because I think you should stop, but just to be mindful of what records are you going to have to keep. And if somebody says, I want a copy of, you know, a commissioner's social media post from X, Y, or Z date, you're still going to have to produce it. Okay. And we'll talk about all that a little bit more. But what if a person's just causing trouble? Or one question I get all the time, we know this person is suing us and they're filing an open records request. Why do we have to give them records? Don't they have to go through the court system? No. Anybody, anytime, anywhere can request a public record. One thing to note, until watch the General Assembly, but until there is some additional legislative movement, and we will get information out to you, cities now have 10 calendar days to respond. It's normally 3 business days to respond and produce records. But in light of the pandemic, the Kentucky League of Cities requested that the General Assembly give cities a little bit of breathing room with producing public records when we're not always in the office, when some of us are working on rotating shifts, and that expires at the conclusion of the state of emergency or when the General Assembly determines that a state of emergency no longer exists. So that may change in the upcoming legislative session, but our our legislative advocacy team will let you know as soon as there are any changes, and our municipal law team will let you know precisely how that impacts your city and how that impacts you. So what about council members? I'm a council member, I'm an elected official. What if I want city records? I should be able to just go in and get them. Well, to a certain extent you can, but that's only when you're convened as a member of the city council. So what I mean by that is, as a council member, you may remember JD saying, your authority, your legal authority as an official of the city only extends to your time as you're convened officially as a member of that council. So when the council is in session, as a collective body, you can request city records without having to go through the open records process. As an individual council member, when you're not in session, the requirement is still to go through the open records process. This is not meant to stymie anybody's attempt to investigate or to question anything going on in the city. If the council is convened as a body and they are exercising their authority to investigate any aspect of city government, they can get those records. As an individual council member, however, it's a little different, okay? All right, procedural requirements under the Act. And if you guys have any questions, you can either unmute yourself and jump in, or hopefully somebody will let me know. I can't see the chat when I'm sharing my screen, so I'm not ignoring you, and I may have to wait and get to you after, okay? So procedural requirements. As a matter of state law and our statutes, the city clerk is the official custodian of city records. There's some confusion at various points in that in some instances, a city will have a police clerk to handle police records. You can imagine how many requests your local police department will get for records, for 911 recordings or any documents. That police clerk is not statutorily responsible for those records. The official custodian remains the city clerk. Now, one of the things that we have suggested is if you do have a police clerk who is the official custodian, then the mayor can, by executive order, indicate that that person will be responsible. We think that this is something that the courts would recognize, but that doesn't override statute. If you remember from what we talked about, we can't amend statute by ordinance. We just think that by executive order, that helps lend some credibility. So regardless, we have our custodian, the city clerk, and then state law and city regulations ultimately govern the request, what has to be in the request, how the city has to respond, and any appeal procedures. So those appeal procedures by state law go to the Kentucky Office of Attorney General. One of the requirements in the Open Records Act is that each city has to have a policy. So your city will have a policy. It's probably going to be posted, and it explains this is what we need in your request. This is when we'll respond and providing the appeal process. So just to continue with the agency or with the response, as I said, normally the city is going to have 3 calendar days to respond. There is an important note for y'all about email requests. we have encouraged cities under the current law to clarify whether they're going to accept an open records request by email. More than likely, your city's open records policy is going to indicate whether they do, or whether they will only accept them by US mail, facsimile, or hand delivery. I know, facsimile, it's still in statute. This is in response to a legislative change a few years ago where email was specifically added as an option. What we found was that if cities did not address whether they would or would not accept email, the Kentucky Office of Attorney General determined that that meant by design that they have to accept email. So if you know that your city policy doesn't address it one way or the other, and you would like to amend the policy to address email requests, that's something that the city can do by amending their open records policy. So moving forward, talking about exceptions. There are a lot of exceptions. I think we're up to about 16. I'm not going to go over all 16 exceptions. I don't think you guys want to hear from me that long, but I will go over some that are the most frequent and some that you will hear about as a newly elected official most frequently. Certain personal information that is accepted from production. This doesn't mean that if you have my personnel folder or my personnel file and it has my social security number and my date of birth, it doesn't mean that you can say, sorry, you can't get our personnel file because her information's in there. No, it means that that information has to be redacted. And we'll talk about that in a second. There's also a preliminary documents exception. The preliminary documents exception is simply saying, look, if you have a document that hasn't been officially adopted by final action of the city, then you can't rely on that as an official public record. So for example, city minutes, right? The minutes taken of a city meeting are not official until they're adopted. So if you have a meeting today, for example, and then tomorrow somebody files an open records request for it, well, the legislative body hasn't had an opportunity to review the minutes to make sure they're accurate. They haven't officially adopted them as an official city record. There could have been some errors or some misunderstandings contained in the official record that needed to be corrected. Now, this doesn't mean that you can simply never adopt your minutes so you don't have to produce them. That was actually attempted by some well-meaning agency who thought they could get around the Open Records Act and just never adopt their minutes. Not so fast. After that, of course, there was an Attorney General's opinion that stated, well, no, after you have one meeting to adopt your minutes. So if I have a meeting tonight and the minutes are taken, and then I have another meeting next week, and I try to escape by not accepting those minutes and making them part of the official record, they're going to be adopted anyway, just by virtue of the law. Okay. And then ongoing law enforcement actions. Now, in this instance, you're really going to have to rely on your city attorney and your city clerk, because when you're talking about ongoing law enforcement actions, it's going to depend under which statute or which exception you're claiming. There's a general law enforcement exception in the Open Records Act, and then there's also a separate exemption for law enforcement documents under 17, I think it's 150. But regardless, if you are trying to keep them, or if any agency would like to accept any law enforcement records due to an ongoing law enforcement action, they're going to have to at least make a preliminary showing that releasing the information would cause harm. So it would hamper the investigation, reveal the identity of confidential informant, or if it's in proactive prosecution, the prosecutor can provide you a note indicating we can't release this, it's going to harm our prosecution. So now under redactions, if there is protected information in a document that is subject to release, the agency is required to redact that information. Some of y'all have probably seen this. The federal government's great at this. they'll release a piece of paper and you'll see it on the news, and everything will be redacted except for like the word and or the, it's completely redacted. That's probably not going to fly for most city records. However, back to my personnel file, if somebody had to release like my initial application, any other information, any awards that I received or promotions, my social security number, my date of birth, probably my address, my mailing address, some of that information will be redacted. One hint, if any of you ever have to redact for any reason, do not use a black magic marker. One time I was helping my open records custodian and I went through an entire file with black marker redacting. And when you copy it, the black marker doesn't redact. You can see everything. So I took all that time trying to be helpful and whiteout. You have to use whiteout. Yeah, 4 hours of my life gone, useless. So, but it does have to be redacted, copied, and provided. Now, mayors, this is important. You must distribute information on open meetings and open records to all newly elected and appointed officials within 60 days of the start of that individual's term or appointment. This doesn't matter. I mean, for you guys, it's going to be within 60 days after January 1 for all your newly electeds. However, if you were to appoint a new police chief on May 1st, then you're going to have 60 days from May 1st to provide them with the same documentation. We will be sending something out to y'all to remind you in January, but this is just important for you to note that every single time there's a new appointment and every single time there's a new election, this is going to, sorry, I see Marna Kilpatrick's kids on there. They're having a ball. It was good to see them. But anyway, you're going to have 60 days from that appointment or election to provide them with the documents.
Hey, Morgan.
Yeah.
We do have a question in the chat.
Okay.
From Jackie Oliver in Oak Grove. How long do you have to keep employee files?
Okay, that's a great question. The records retention schedule, and we have a long records retention schedule for cities. That is held by the Kentucky Department of Library and Archives. It's online. I say held, it is published by the Kentucky Department of Libraries and Archives. And I don't remember employee files off the top of my head, and I should because we get this question regularly, but I can look that up and send it to you along with the full records retention schedule. They have a specific records retention schedule for local governments. And you can also check out on klc.org, if you go under the More tab, we have legal blogs and personnel blogs, and I guarantee you that is in one of the personnel blogs, in one of the responses, a full explanation of what is and is not both retained and produced under open records. So.
Yeah, I'll go find that and post it in the chat.
Thank you, Terry. I appreciate it. Okay, on to ordinances. If there are no other questions on open records, I know it's a fascinating topic and y'all, we could talk about it all day. Okay, on to ordinances. So this is going to be most of your job, talking about ordinances, adopting ordinances, establishing how you want your city to be operated. This is really an important role for the legislative body and for the executive body. Any ordinance is just the official action. JD talked about it, having a leash law, or, you know, one of the things that I like to mention is we'll have a state law that state highways, let's say the speed limit is going to be 50 miles an hour, 55 miles an hour. However, the road out in front of my house, the city of Lexington has determined is 25 miles per hour. The city of Lexington can't change the speed limit on the state highway, right? But they can change the road out in front of my house, which by the way, they did a few years ago. It used to be 35. But that's the difference, right? As long as we're in our city limits, our ordinances apply. Outside, not so much, but it is the law within our city limits. It's the official action of the legislative body. It's going to apply to city officials and citizens both. It's enforceable under the authority of the state. So the state authorizes all of these actions by statute, including the penalties. So they can be civil or criminal penalties as long as there's no conflict with state or federal law, like JD has said before. It's used to regulate conduct, appropriate funds. Your budget is going to be in an ordinance. Establish compensation. JD talked about the pay and classification ordinance. Annex territory, that has to be done by ordinance. And there will be instances where a state statute will specify that a city has to take action. Enactment procedures. The process of enacting an ordinance is not complex, but there are certain specific requirements. It has to be introduced by a member of a legislative body. This means in a mayor-council form of government where you have a clear separation of powers and the mayor has the executive authority and the council has the legislative authority, the mayor cannot introduce legislation. The ordinances will have to be introduced by a member of the legislative body, by a council member. It has to be in writing, can only relate to one subject as stated in its title. So it can't be an ordinance about speed limits and then contain a restriction on dog leashes or any kind of leash law, right? It has to be on one subject and it has to contain an enacting clause, be it ordained by the city of Monticello, okay? That's the enacting clause it must include. And one plug that I will mention, if you come to the City Officials Academy, which we highly recommend, you will receive our City Officials Legal Handbook. It is, a lot of our members call it the Bible. We had a question earlier whether 2019 is going to be obsolete. You will be getting a newly minted 2021 copy hot off the press before anybody else can. And you're also going to have an exclusive 3-day period to order more than one copy. We will release an email to y'all where you can go to our website and order some copies. So that's going to be first to those of you who attend the City Officials Academy. And the reason I mentioned it, it includes a lot of step-by-step information about ordinance adoption and the process. The enactment procedure, you have to have 2 readings on 2 separate days unless it's an emergency. Don't get excited about the emergency. The emergency only applies if there are 2/3 of the legislative body that agree it's an emergency. And an emergency really has to be an emergency. We're talking floods, ice storms, or the unfortunate instance if, for example, a pump station goes down in your city and people are going to be without water. Well, you kind of have to move. It's proved.
Morgan, it's the right time to answer Councilman-elect Dottie's question about the readings. Can it first be read by the city attorney, then by motion proposed by the council?
That's a great question. So the readings have to be on 2 separate days. Okay, it has to be introduced by a member of the legislative body. So the introduction has to be by the member of the legislative body. In the first reading, it doesn't have to be read in total. It's the introduction, so it can be introduced in summary. The second reading, that has to be on a separate day. So you can't do this in one single meeting. You can, for example, today, if you're meeting more this evening, you could have your first reading and read the attorney's summary once it's introduced by the member of the legislative body. And then tomorrow, you could have a special called meeting and then have the second reading and full passage. I hope that answers your question. Okay, I'm gonna take that as a yes.
He said, he followed up here. He said, so the city attorney cannot actually present the proposal.
Once it is introduced by the legislative body member, the city attorney could read the summary into the record, but the legislative body member has to introduce the ordinance itself. So the city attorney cannot introduce and present the legislative proposal in total. Okay, good. All right, once on the first reading, it doesn't, the legislative body does not have to take an actual vote. That's really just the introduction. So the member of the legislative body can go ahead and introduce it, read the summary, provide that information. Then on the second day, that's when you have to take a vote. The majority of cities I encounter have a vote with the first reading. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, if a member of the legislative body is uncertain whether they think it'll pass, sometimes that's litmus test to let y'all know whether you think it's going to go through. On the second day, for full passage, that's when the vote is required. It has to be approved by majority of a quorum. So if you are in a 6-member council or 12-member commission, let's just go with a 6-member council and a 4-member commission. But in a 6-member council, a quorum is going to be 4 people, correct? So then you're going to need at least 3 people of that 4-person quorum to pass the ordinance in its second reading. Then for full passage, it's not officially passed until it's published, and that publication has to occur within 30 days after the second reading and final approval. So, and those are kind of the strict parameters in the process for ordinance approval. And do y'all have any questions about the ordinances before we move on to public purpose spending? Okay, clear as mud, I know. Public purpose spending. All right, now we're getting to money. Everybody likes money. The Kentucky Constitution, Section 171, is very clear that taxes shall be levied for public purposes only. This means that every dollar the city spends has to be for a public purpose. Expenditures have to be good for the community rather than solely for the good of a single individual. What this means, this doesn't mean that private individuals cannot benefit on some level. Economic development is the perfect example for this. A city may decide, hey, we're gonna sell this city property at below market value. That may seem like it's only gonna benefit the person purchasing the property. However, the real intent, and you'll see intent in bright red, that means it's important. The real intent of that sale isn't to benefit that individual business owner. It's because that business owner is going to bring a business to their community that might hire or might result in jobs for 10 people or 200 people or an increased tax base. There may be a significant public benefit for allowing the sale of that property at below market value. All right, now when we're talking about bidding and procurement, there's a pop quiz. Is your city a general bidding statute or local government model procurement code? Which do you operate under? I did a quick check and I'm pretty sure everybody on here is general bidding. I know Bowling Green is, Flemingsburg, there were a few that I kind of spot checked. Generally, local model procurement code will be adopted by some of the larger cities. It simply contains a more structured process for opening bids, for procurement generally. The general bidding statute is a little more lenient, provides a fewer contours for opening bids and the like. So on to procurement. Keep talking about money. When a city is looking at procurement, there are specific requirements for all cities. Okay, you're generally required to advertise and solicit bids for any purchase that exceeds $30,000, and that was actually increased a few years ago. Some cities still have the vestige of the old statute, statutory limit of 20,000 in your ordinance. If you get bored and check your ordinances, or check your ordinances, just because, and you find out that yours still is at 20,000, our suggestion is not to be specific about the number in your ordinance, but refer back to the state statute. Both laws have exceptions for professional services and emergency situations. What that means is professional services are generally defined like banking services. So you don't have to bid if the city decides to change banks. Insurance services, the city doesn't necessarily have to put it out for bid, some do. Attorneys, engineers, architects, those types of services do not have to be put out for bid. And then, as we discussed, emergency situations, but just like having an emergency meeting, when you're talking emergency situations, it's a true emergency situation. Okay, your pump station goes down, 20 people are going to be without water. That's an emergency, right? Flooding, ice storm, that kind of situation. But even in these emergencies, regardless of what the city needs, you're going to have to realize how your annual budget dictates this process. Okay, because the city cannot spend more money than is appropriated. On to budgeting. Do we have any questions about the procurement? Okay, let's talk about budgets. All right. Cities operate on a July 1 to June 30th budget, or June 30th fiscal year. The budget has to be adopted by city ordinance. So the way this works is in about May, or probably the beginning of June, the mayor will usually, or the mayor or the city manager in the mayor council form of government, the mayor will propose, like JD said, the city budget. In a city manager form of government, the city presents. And in the commission form of government, it's all hands on deck. But the mayor will generally kind of help guide the discussion as the presiding officer. Regardless, the initial budget is usually presented in the beginning of June. Discussions will begin, but hopefully ongoing negotiations between the legislative body and the executive have occurred prior to this. We emphasize frequently to cities that as best you can, if the executive and the legislative work together, the city just functions better. So cities must adopt a new budget each fiscal year by ordinance, and it cannot have expenditures in excess of revenues. That's the big one. Many cities have different types of budgets. They can be a general budget where the mayor or the executive has a lot of leeway as to how the monies are spent. Some have a more restrictive budget where there are a lot of line items, meaning, more than just police, fire, administrative. They might specify that certain sums can only be used for certain expenditures. This restricts the executive ability to spend. Regardless, the proposed budget is going to be presented by the mayor and the mayor council cities and the city manager and city manager cities. All right, city funds can only be spent in accordance with the enacted budget. And it's going to be, once the city council and a mayor council form of government passes the budget, the mayor is going to have discretion to spend those city funds within the parameters established by the legislative body. So for example, if there is a certain amount for salaries and the mayor is given enough money in that budget for raises, the mayor can implement raises for the staff, so long as that their ultimate salaries don't exceed the pay and classification scale. In a city manager form of government, same situation. The city manager is going to have some latitude as to how that money is spent. Ultimately, as JD mentioned, the Board of Commissioners is responsible for how that money is spent, but the city manager is going to have some initial latitude in how that goes. Failure to comply with the budget ordinance can have some big consequences. Okay, so if a state auditor comes in and they find that there have been some pretty bad expenditures, they can walk back any expenditures. There also may be some penalties and fines in your ethics ordinance for certain things, for certain expenditures that weren't properly approved. It's important to make sure that as these funds approach exhaustion, if you think there's going to be more city expenses that are necessary, to amend the budget and put more money in those funds. It's very important to make sure that any expenses comply with the city ordinance. Okay, ethics. State law requires every city to have an ethics ordinance, and y'all do. It may not have been amended since 1994, and if that's the case, call us. We do have a certified city of ethics program in the municipal law department, and we would love to help y'all. If you're one of our member cities in our insurance city, we do have a model ethics ordinance we will send you. But basically, state law requires that you have an ethics ordinance that covers certain things. It has to include a standard of conduct for all your members. It requires financial disclosure statements for all officials and candidates for elected office. So most of y'all have already complied with part of your ethics ordinance. It has to contain a nepotism policy. Now, it doesn't say what has to be in your nepotism policy. As we like to say, it might say, we love nepotism in our city, okay? Not really, nobody has that I've seen. But it does have to have some type of nepotism policy. The reason it's not specific is, for example, I like to use my family. My family's from Lyon County, an original land grant family. I'm related to at least half the county. So if you have a super strict nepotism policy, my family's not gonna be able to work there. And it may be the same in a smaller community. So the nepotism policy should be tailored to meet the needs of your individual city. And we do work with cities to help them achieve that. Because you don't want something in there that people are going to have to violate. Has to have designation of an enforcement body or an officer. A lot of cities aren't going to have enough people to have an actual ethics commission that investigates and hears any appeals. An individual person can be identified as your ethics officer to receive any complaints and investigates. And the ethics ordinance may specify that it applies to appointed officials and employees, and we recommend that. Finally, we want to make sure that everybody's aware of the general prohibition against contracting with the city. No elected or appointed official or employee can contract with the city. The bar includes an oral and a written contract. So it could be a written contract, or it could be, hey, we're going to call council member or commissioner so-and-so and ask them to their landscaping company to mow our grass. Not contracts awarded by bid. Those are okay, or those entered into prior to taking office or appointment or employment. And it can be overcome with proper disclosures during a meeting of the legislative body. So in an open meeting, the individual makes a disclosure, it's put on the record of their interest in the contract. There are findings on the record by the legislative body that it's in the city's best interest to proceed with this individual, and that too is on the record. So those disclosures have to be made before anyone can contract with them. This includes employees, it includes boards, commissions, so people on your planning and zoning commission. It includes every official. So to sum up, your favorite part, the conclusion. Know your roles and limits on the powers and authorities in your form of government. It's just important. We all have to know our role. Avoid costly litigation by conferring with informed attorneys, your city attorney, or call us on any personnel changes. Meetings and public records have to be open and accessible to the public with the limitations we discussed. And if you have any other questions, you can always call us or email. Public funds have to be spent for public purposes only. And cities operate on the annual budget from July 1 to June 30th of the fiscal year, and expenditures have to conform with that budget. And be familiar with your city's ethics ordinances so you don't violate the law. Violations of your ethics ordinances are a Class A misdemeanor, and nobody wants to do that, especially if it's simply a mistake. And don't forget our City Officials Academy. So that's it for me, unless y'all have any questions, and I'm here to answer any questions y'all have.
Thank you, Morgan. Appreciate that. Before we wrap up, I know we've gone over, and that's my fault for talking so long. But y'all have any questions for us before we adjourn? Welcome to unmute, or you can type it in chat. We can watch it there. If not, then that concludes. Oh, hold on, Tyler. Litchfield asked, if someone calls in a complaint to a code enforcement officer about a code violation, is the complaint considered a public record as well as their name?
So it is considered a public record. Now, the question is, would the person making the complaint have a right to privacy or any expectation of privacy? What we've seen is that they're not going to have a right to privacy unless there's some type of anonymous tip line or something where it's not possible to determine the identity of the individual.
That looks like it. It was great to meet you all. Great to see some familiar faces. And
Hi,
some faces as well. So you all have a good rest of the day. You can email us or call us at any time. We're going to email out the slides in a PDF so you can have those to reference. And good luck and congratulations one more time. We got your back as you go forward. Have a good rest of the day.
hey Morgan, I had sent you a message on chat.
Yes, ma'am.